The old woman's hands shook as she pressed them against the glowing crystal. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it echoing in the quiet cave. After all these years, after waiting so long, the day had finally come. Inside the crystal, a man slept peacefully. His face looked young and strong, like he had just closed his eyes yesterday. But she knew the truth. He had been sleeping here for 250 years. Outside the cave, she could hear strange sounds getting closer. Loud machines flying in the sky. Heavy trucks rolling up the mountain. People shouting orders in voices that meant trouble. They had found this secret place at last. She took a deep breath and spoke the old words she had memorized so long ago. Words that could break the sleeping spell. Words that would bring him back to life. She whispered them. Small cracks appeared on the crystal's surface. It started to glow brighter and brighter. The woman remembered the day she had put him here. The world was ending then. Dark creatures from another place were destroying everything. Cities burned. People screamed and ran, but there was nowhere safe to hide. This brave warrior was the only one who could fight them, but he was dying from his wounds. She had made a terrible choice that day. Save his life by putting him to sleep forever, or let him die and lose the world's greatest protector. She chose to save him, hoping that someday the world would need him again. That day was today. The crystal cracked open with a sound like breaking glass. Cold mist poured out, and the man inside took his first breath in centuries. His eyes opened, slowly. They were the same bright blue eyes she remembered. He looked confused at first, then focused on her face. "How long was I sleeping?" he asked. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't used it in ages. She swallowed hard before answering. 250 years. He sat up quickly, his hand going to the sword at his side. Even after all this time, his warrior training kicked in immediately. He looked around the cave, then back at her. She could see him trying to understand what she had told him. "Everyone I knew." Started to say, "They're all gone," she said softly. "Sorry, but the world needs you now more than ever." Sounds outside were getting louder. She could hear boots on rocks, people climbing up toward their hiding place. But there was something else too, cold feeling in the air that made her skin crawl. The dark creatures had returned and they were hunting. She quickly gathered her old leather bag. Inside were magical items she had collected over the centuries, books with ancient knowledge, weapons blessed with protective spells, everything she thought they might need for the battle ahead. "I don't understand," the warrior said, standing up and testing his balance. "If I was asleep for so long, how are you still here? How are you still alive?" She had dreaded this question for decades. "I'm not like you," she explained. I don't age the same way. I've been waiting here, watching over you, preparing for this day." He looked at her with new understanding. She wasn't just the woman who had saved him. She was something more than human. Something that could live for centuries and still look almost the same. "The dark creatures are back, aren't they?" he asked. She nodded. "Stronger than before. Been sleeping too, gathering power. And the world above has changed so much. People forgot about magic. They forgot about the old ways. They think science and technology can solve everything." Through the cave entrance, she could see lights moving in the distance. Bright white beams cutting through the darkness. The modern world's soldiers were almost here, but they didn't know what they were really hunting. "We need to leave," she whispered urgently. "There are tunnels deeper in the mountain. I've been mapping them for years, just in case." The warrior nodded and followed her toward the back of the cave. As they walked, she explained more about what had happened while he slept. How the world had grown and changed. How cities now had millions of people. How humans could fly in machines and talk to each other across great distances. But she also told him about the problems. How people had stopped believing in magic and wonder. How they had forgotten that there were other worlds beyond their own. How the barriers between dimensions had grown weak because no one remembered to maintain them. "That's how they came back," she said, as they reached a narrow tunnel entrance. The dark creatures. They found a way through the cracks. Behind them, the first soldiers entered the cave. She could hear their surprised voices as they discovered the broken crystal and realized someone had been living here. But there was another sound too, a sound that made her blood turn cold. Something dark and shapeless was moving between the soldiers. something that shouldn't exist in the normal world. The creatures from the Shadow Realm had found them at last. The warrior heard it too. His entire body tensed, and his hand tightened on his sword handle. Even after centuries of sleep, he recognized the sound of his oldest enemies. "They remember me," he said quietly. "Of course they do," she replied. "Yeah, you're the one who nearly destroyed them all. They've been waiting for revenge just as long as I've been waiting to wake you up." They hurried into the tunnel as the sounds of fighting erupted behind them. The modern soldiers were brave, but their weapons couldn't really hurt creatures made of living darkness. She felt sorry for them, but there was nothing she could do to help. As they moved deeper into the mountain, the warrior asked more questions about the world above. She tried to explain cars and phones and computers, but it was like describing magic to someone who had never seen it before. "People live in giant towers now," she said. "Some cities have millions of people all living close together. They've learned to heal diseases that used to kill everyone. They can even visit the moon." He stopped walking and stared at her. "The moon? People can actually go to the moon?" "Yes, but they've also forgotten how to see magic. They think everything has a scientific explanation. They don't believe in things they can't measure or test." They reached an underground stream that flowed toward the valley below. As they prepared to cross it, she heard the first creature getting closer. Its footsteps didn't make normal sounds. Instead, it was like hearing darkness itself walking. "Are you ready for this?" she asked him. "To fight again after so long?" He drew his sword, and it began to glow with its own inner light. The ancient runes carved into the blade started to shine. Even after all these years, the weapon remembered its purpose. "I was born ready," he said with a small smile that reminded her why she had fallen in love with him centuries ago. The first shadow creature appeared at the tunnel entrance behind them. It looked like a person, but wrong somehow. It was too tall, with arms that bent in impossible ways, and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. The warrior stepped forward to meet it, his sword blazing like a torch. When the blessed steel met shadow flesh, there was a flash of light, and the creature screamed before dissolving into nothing. "They're definitely stronger than before," he said, breathing hard, "but not strong enough." As they crossed the cold stream, she felt hope for the first time in decades. Her sleeping warrior was awake. His power was still strong, and somewhere out there, others were waiting to help them save the world once again. The warrior's legs felt strange as he walked through the dark tunnel. After sleeping for so long, every step reminded him that his body was waking up too. His muscles remembered how to move, but everything felt like a dream. He was slowly coming out of this. The woman walked ahead of him, her steps sure and confident. She knew these tunnels like they were her own home. He watched her move and tried to understand how much she had changed. She looked almost the same, but there was something different in the way she carried herself. Like she had seen too much and learned things she wished she could forget. "Tell me about them," he said as they walked. "The people who were chasing us. They're not like the soldiers I remember." She glanced back at him. "They call themselves a Special Forces unit. The government created them to investigate strange events. It's things they can't explain with normal science. It's been tracking unusual energy readings from this mountain for months." He thought about this. In his time, if something strange happened, people knew it was probably magic. They might be scared, but they understood that the world held mysteries. Now it seemed like people tried to explain everything, even when they couldn't. "What will happen to them?" he asked, thinking about the soldiers they had left behind with the shadow creatures. Her face grew sad. Some might survive. The creatures usually prefer to spread fear rather than destroy everything at once. But those men have no idea what they're really fighting. They reached a wider part of the tunnel where water dripped from the ceiling. She stopped and opened her leather bag, pulling out a strange device that glowed with soft blue light. It looked like it was made from both metal and crystal, something that belonged to both the old world and the new one. "I made this during the years you slept," she explained. "It can show us where the shadow creatures are moving. I had to learn how to blend the old magic with new technology." He stared at the device as images appeared in the air above it. Could see the mountain from above, with red dots moving around like angry insects. There were more shadow creatures than he had expected, and they were spreading out to search for them. "You learned to use their science?" he asked. "I had to. The world changed so much that the old ways alone weren't enough anymore. I spent decades in their schools learning how they think. I worked in their laboratories, understanding their machines. But I never forgot our magic." She touched the device again, and the image changed. Wow. He could see the valley below, where lights moved in organized patterns. Military vehicles surrounding the mountain, helicopters circling like metal birds. "They think this is some kind of terrorist situation," she said. "Their leaders don't believe in magic, so they're trying to solve it like a normal human problem." He sat down on a large rock and tried to process everything she was telling him. The world he had known was gone. The people he had protected were dust. Even the way humans thought about reality had completely changed. "How did you stand it?" he asked quietly, watching everything disappear. "Everyone we knew getting old and dying while you stayed the same." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft and full of old pain. "First 100 years were the hardest. I wanted to give up so many times. I thought about waking you up just so I wouldn't be alone anymore." "Why didn't you?" "Because I could feel them sleeping too, the shadow creatures. They were waiting, growing stronger, in their dark realm, and I knew that when they came back, the world would need you more than I needed comfort." She showed him more images on her device. Cities that stretched for miles, filled with millions of people. Flying machines that carried hundreds of passengers. Across the sky, ships larger than entire villages from his time. "Humanity grew powerful," she said. "They learned to cure diseases that used to kill everyone. They can talk to someone on the other side of the world instantly. They've explored deep oceans and even walked on the moon. But they lost something too," he said, understanding. "Yes, they stopped believing in wonder. Everything had to have an explanation. Magic became just stories for children. They forgot that there are other worlds touching ours." The device suddenly flashed red. Shadow creatures were moving closer to their location. They needed to keep moving. As they walked deeper into the mountain, she told him about the years she had spent preparing, how she had found others who still remembered the old ways, families who had kept ancient knowledge alive through generations, people who understood that science and magic could work together. "There's a place," she said, "a hidden city where the descendants of magical bloodlines have been living in secret. I've been bringing them together for centuries, preparing for this day." "A secret city?" "Under the ruins of what used to be called Geneva. Old magical families built it during the early years after you fell asleep. They knew the shadow creatures would return someday." They reached another stream, this one flowing faster and deeper. As they prepared to cross, he noticed something that made him stop. The water itself seemed to glow faintly, and he could feel power in it. "This water is special," he said. "You can still sense it," she said with relief. "I was worried that sleeping so long might have weakened your connection to magic. It feels stronger, actually, like it's been building up while I slept." She smiled for the first time since waking him. "That's exactly what I hoped would happen. The spell I used didn't just preserve your body. It was slowly gathering magical energy from the earth itself, storing it inside you." They crossed the stream carefully. The water was cold, but it made him feel more awake and alive. On the other side, the tunnel split into 3 different paths. "Which way leads to your hidden city?" he asked. "The middle path? But first there's something else you need to see." She led him to a small cave off to the side. Inside, the walls were covered with drawings and writing. Some of it was in the old language he remembered, but much of it was new. "I've been keeping records," she explained. "Everything that happened while you slept, all the changes in the world, all the signs that pointed to the shadow creatures' return." He studied the walls, reading about wars and discoveries, famines and celebrations. Humanity's story for the past 2.5 centuries, told by someone who had watched it all happen. "You documented everything," he said with amazement. Someone had to remember. Someone had to understand how the old world connected to the new one. As he read, he began to understand just how much work she had done while he slept. She hadn't just been waiting. She had been building, learning, preparing for a war that most people didn't even know was coming. The device in her hands flashed again. The shadow creatures had found their trail and were moving fast through the tunnels behind them. "We need to go," she said urgently. "The hidden city is still half a day's journey from here." As they hurried toward the middle tunnel, he felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries. Not just the excitement of coming battle, but hope. She had spent 250 years making sure he wouldn't wake up alone and unprepared. "Thank you," he said as they started down the dark path. "For what?" "For never giving up. For believing this day would come." She reached out and briefly squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being worth the wait." The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever. The warriors' boots splashed through shallow puddles as they hurried through the darkness. Behind them, he could hear something that made his skin crawl. It wasn't footsteps exactly, but more like the sound of emptiness moving through solid rock. The woman ahead of him moved with purpose, her glowing device lighting their way. Every few minutes, she would stop and check the small screen, watching red dots that showed where their enemies were moving. "They're getting closer," she whispered, not looking back. "And there's something else, something bigger than the others." He could feel it too. A cold presence that seemed to suck the warmth out of the air around them. In his time, he had fought many shadow creatures, but this felt different, stronger, more intelligent. "How much farther to safety?" he asked. "We're not going to make it to the hidden city," she said, stopping suddenly. "Not with them this close. We need to find another way." She turned to face him, and he could see worry in her eyes, real fear. In all the years he had known her, even during the worst battles, she had never looked this concerned. "There's an old mining complex ahead," she said, "abandoned for decades. If we can reach it, we might be able to hide until they pass by." They quickened their pace, but the sounds behind them were getting louder. Whatever was hunting them wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. It knew they were close. The tunnel opened into a larger space carved out of the mountain. Rusty metal beams stretched across the ceiling, and old machinery sat covered in dust. This place had once been full of workers digging deep into the earth, but now it felt like a tomb. "It's over here," she said, leading him toward a heavy metal door. "This leads to the old elevator shaft. You can climb down and hide in the lower levels." As she worked to open the rusted door, he heard something that made his blood freeze. A voice calling out in the darkness behind them. But it wasn't speaking any language he recognized. The words seemed to twist and bend in ways that hurt too. "Listen to. They're trying to track us through sound," she explained, finally getting the door open. "Shadow creatures can follow voices across great distances." They slipped through the doorway and found themselves looking down a deep shaft. Old cables hung like spider webs, and metal ladders were built into the walls. Far below, he could see faint light coming from somewhere. "How deep does this go?" he asked. "About 200 feet? The miners dug all the way down to an underground lake. It's one of the reasons I chose this mountain to hide you. The water down there has special properties." They started climbing down, the ladder moving as quietly as possible. His hands were getting used to gripping things again, and his muscles remembered the rhythm of climbing. But every sound they made seemed to echo through the shaft like a bell. Halfway down, they heard the metal door above them crash open. Something had found their hiding place. "Don't look up," she whispered urgently. "Don't make eye contact with them. That's how they lock onto you." He could feel something staring down at them from above. A presence that felt like ice water running down his spine. But he kept his eyes focused on the ladder rungs and kept climbing. They reached a platform, about 50 feet from the bottom. She pulled him into a side tunnel that led away from the main shaft. Here, the walls were different. Instead of rough stone, they were smooth and almost seemed to glow with their own light. "What is this place?" he asked. "The miners found something they weren't expecting," she said. "A natural cave system that was much older than the mountain itself. They never understood what they had discovered, but I did." The tunnel curved and opened into a large cavern. In the center was a lake that glowed with soft blue light. The water was so clear he could see all the way to the bottom, even though it looked very deep. This is why the shadow creatures can't. Follow us easily, she explained. This water is connected to the old magic. It creates a barrier they don't like to cross. They sat down by the water's edge, finally able to rest for a moment. He could still feel the presence of their enemies above, but it seemed more distant now, less threatening. Tell me about the others, he said. The people who remembered the old ways. She dipped her hand in the glowing water and watched ripples spread across the surface. They come from all over the world. Families who kept the ancient knowledge alive even when everyone else forgot. Some are warriors like you, though not as powerful. Others are healers or makers of magical items or keepers of old books. How many? A few thousand, spread across the globe? Not many, but enough. They've been preparing for this day just like I have. Above them, they heard a sound like metal being torn apart. The shadow creatures were destroying the old mining equipment, searching every corner of the complex. They're angry, she said. Shadow creatures don't like being denied their prey. He stood up and walked to the edge of the lake. As he looked into the glowing water, he saw something that surprised him. Its reflection looked the same as always, but there was something new. A light around him that hadn't been there before. The magic you stored in me while I slept, he said. It's changing me somehow. She came to stand beside him and looked at both their reflections. I hoped it would. The world has changed so much that we need to change too. The old ways alone won't be enough to win this war. Something splashed in the center of the lake. They both looked out and saw circles spreading across the water, but there was nothing there that could have made the splash. What was that? He asked. Before she could answer, a head broke the surface of the water, but it wasn't human. It was something else entirely, something with silver skin and large, intelligent eyes that reflected the lake's glow. Don't be afraid, she said quickly. They're friends. More heads appeared around the lake. Beings that looked almost human but moved through the water like they belonged there. Their voices when they spoke sounded like music mixed with the sound of flowing streams. We have been waiting, one of them said, swimming closer to shore. The old agreements still hold. We will help in the coming battle. The warriors stared in amazement. Even in his time, he had never seen creatures like these. What are they? Water guardians, she explained. They've been living in hidden places like this for thousands of years. It's much longer than humans have existed. The lead guardian pulled itself partway onto the shore. Its body was beautiful and strange, perfectly adapted for life in the water, but able to communicate with land dwellers. The shadow creatures fear our realm, it said. Water holds memories they cannot touch or corrupt. We can provide safe passage to your destination. Above them, the sounds of searching had stopped. Either the shadow creatures had given up, or they were planning something else. How? The warrior asked. Underground rivers connect all the sacred lakes, the guardian explained. We can carry you through the water paths to the hidden city. It will be faster than traveling through the tunnels and much safer. The woman looked at him. It's the best chance we have. The shadow creatures can't follow us through their realm. He nodded, understanding that they had little choice. Beings in the lake had offered them help when they needed it most. What do we need to do? He asked. The guardian smiled, showing teeth like pearls. Trust us, and hold your breath for longer than you think possible. The magic in this water will help you survive the journey. As they prepared to enter the lake, he realized that everything about this war would be different from the battles. He remembered new allies, new enemies, and new ways of fighting. But the same courage that had carried him through the old war would have to be enough for the new one. The water felt strange against his skin as they slipped into the glowing lake. It was warm, almost alive, and seemed to wrap around them like a gentle embrace. The water guardian swam beside them, moving with graceful power through the depths. Breathe. Normally, the guardian said, its voice somehow clear, even underwater. The sacred water will give you what you need. He tried to stay calm as they descended deeper into the lake. The light around them grew stronger, not dimmer, as if the water itself was made of liquid starlight. Fish swam past that he had never seen before, with scales that sparkled like jewels. The woman swam ahead of him, completely comfortable in this underwater world. She had clearly done this before. As they moved through tunnels carved in the lake bottom, she pointed out ancient symbols carved into the rock walls. These mark the safe passages, she explained. The water guardians have been using these routes for thousands of years. They swam through a series of connected pools, each one leading deeper under the mountain. In some places, the tunnels were so narrow they had to swim single file. In others, they opened into vast underwater caverns filled with strange and beautiful plants. After what felt like hours, they finally surfaced in a pool inside a cave. The water guardian helped them climb out onto a stone platform. As they caught their breath, he noticed that his clothes were completely dry, as if the magical water had passed right through them. The entrance to the hidden city is just ahead, the guardian said. We cannot go farther with you. Our realm is water, not the world of air and stone. They thanked their underwater guide and walked toward a wall that looked solid but somehow felt different. The woman pressed her hand against a specific stone, and the wall opened like a door. Welcome to New Haven, she said with pride. Nothing could have prepared him for what lay beyond that hidden entrance. The cavern stretched farther than he could see, filled with buildings that seemed to grow from the stone itself. Lights that weren't quite electric and weren't quite fire-illuminated streets, where people walked and talked and lived normal lives, but these weren't normal people. He could sense it immediately. Every person he saw carried some spark of the old magic. Some had it stronger than others, but all of them had kept the ancient knowledge alive. A group of people approached them as they entered the main square. Their leader was a tall woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Behind her walked a younger man whose hands glowed faintly with inner fire, and an older gentleman whose very presence felt solid and unmovable as a mountain. The last warrior awakens, the silver-haired woman said with a slight bow. We have been preparing for this day, for generations. You know who I am? He asked. Every child born in New Haven learns your story, she replied. How you stood alone against the shadow tide. How you sacrificed yourself so others could live. You are a legend here. The young man with the glowing hand stepped forward. My family has guarded the southern borders for 8 generations. We kept the old fighting techniques alive, waiting for someone to teach them to. The mountain-solid older man nodded respectfully. My clan maintained the warrior traditions in the northern highlands. We never forgot the old ways of protecting people. As they walked through the city, he saw wonders that amazed him. Children learning to move small objects with their minds. Craftsmen forging weapons that hummed with protective energy. Healers growing plants that could cure diseases in minutes instead of days. How did you build all this without the outside world knowing? He asked. Very carefully, the woman explained.
Wow.
And with a lot of help from people who work in the government above. Not everyone forgot about magic. Some of them have been protecting us for decades. They entered a large building at the center of the city. Inside, the walls were covered with maps and charts. Some showed the world as he remembered it. Others displayed the modern version with its huge cities and new countries. Show him the situation, the silver-haired leader said to her companions. The young man touched the largest map, and it began to glow. Red marks appeared in dozens of locations around the world. These are confirmed shadow creature sightings in the past month, he explained. They're not just randomly appearing. There's a pattern. The older man pointed to specific locations. They're targeting places where the barriers between worlds are weakest. Old battlegrounds, ancient temples, places where great magic was once used. They're trying to tear bigger holes between dimensions, the woman realized with growing alarm. Not just invade our world, but merge it with theirs. The warrior studied the maps carefully. In his time, the shadow creatures had been content to simply destroy human civilization. This was something much worse. They succeeded in merging the dimensions. Nowhere would be safe. Not even death would provide escape from their influence. What about the governments? He asked. Do any of them understand what's really happening? Silver-haired leader shook her head sadly. A few individuals in high places know the truth, but most refuse to believe it. They're treating this like a terrorist attack or some kind of new weapon. Their armies are brave, but conventional weapons can barely scratch a shadow creature. We've been trying to help them secretly, the young man added. Some of our people have joined their special forces, providing protection spells disguised as new technology. But it's not enough. They showed him video footage on a device that looked like a combination of crystal and metal. Images of modern soldiers firing at creatures that seemed to be made of living darkness. The bullets passed right through them, but when the creatures touched the soldiers, the humans collapsed, as if all the life had been drained from them. The shadow creatures have learned new tricks too, the older man explained. They can possess electronic devices now, turn the modern world's own technology against it. The warrior watched as traffic lights malfunctioned, causing accidents. Computer systems crashed, leaving hospitals and power plants helpless. Cell phone towers sent out signals that made people feel hopeless and afraid. They're using humanity's dependence on technology as a weapon, he said, understanding the terrible cleverness of it. Exactly. The more connected the world became, the more vulnerable it became to this kind of attack. A silver-haired woman led them to another room where dozens of people were working at tables covered with both ancient books and modern computers. But we've been preparing too, learning to blend the old magic with new knowledge. She showed him weapons that looked like swords but crackled with energy. Armor that appeared to be made of simple cloth but could stop claws that could cut through steel. Communication devices that worked by magic instead of radio waves, making them immune to the shadow creature's interference. The problem isn't equipment, she said. It's coordination. We have maybe 3,000 people worldwide who are trained and ready to fight. They have unlimited numbers pouring in from their dimension. Unless we can seal the main gateway, the woman who had awakened him said. The primary tier between worlds. Close that, and we cut off their reinforcements. Where is it? The room grew quiet. Finally, the silver-haired leader answered. In the heart of what used to be your homeland. The place where you made your last stand 250 years ago. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The place where he had supposedly died was now covered by one of the world's largest cities. Millions of innocent people lived and worked directly above the spot where the shadow creatures were pouring into this dimension. How many people live there now, he asked. Over 9 million in the city itself, nearly 15 million in the surrounding area. The numbers were almost impossible to comprehend. In his time, the largest cities had maybe 100,000 people. The idea of 15 million humans living in one place was mind-boggling. We can't evacuate them, the young man said quietly. Even if the governments believed us, where would? That many people go, and the shadow creatures would just follow them, the older man added. They feed on fear and despair. A refugee crisis would make them stronger, not weaker. The warrior sat down heavily in a chair that had been carved from solid stone. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than his armor ever had. Not only did he have to fight an enemy that had grown stronger during his sleep, but he had to do it while protecting more innocent people than had lived in his entire world. There is hope, the woman said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You're not the same warrior who fell 250 years ago. The magic I stored in you has been growing all this time, and you won't be fighting alone, she gestured to the people around them. Every person in this city is willing to stand with you, and there are others in hidden communities around the world. We have allies you haven't met yet. The Water Guardians are just the beginning, the silver-haired leader added. There are others who have been waiting for this day. Beings who remember the old alliances. As if summoned by her words, a new figure entered the room. This one was clearly not human. Though it walked on 2 legs and wore clothes like a person, its skin had a greenish tint, and its eyes were the color of deep forest shadows. The tree shepherds offer their aid, it said in a voice like wind through leaves. As do the stone singers and the flame dancers, the old compacts still hold. Genuine hope. The city was burning when they finally reached the surface. Tall buildings that had stood for decades were crumbling as shadow creatures poured through cracks in reality itself. The warrior had never seen destruction on this scale, even during the worst battles of his time. They emerged from a hidden entrance in what had once been a subway tunnel. Above them, the sounds of chaos filled the air. Sirens wailing, people screaming, helicopters buzzing overhead like angry metal insects. The main gateway opened 2 hours ago, the silver-haired leader said, checking a device that showed the magical energy readings. It's directly under the old cathedral in the city center. The warrior looked around at his companions. 50% of the best fighters from New Haven had volunteered for this mission. Each one carried weapons that hummed with ancient power, armor that shimmered with protective spells, and the knowledge passed down through generations of secret training. But 50 people against an army of shadow creatures seemed impossible odds, even with their magical advantages. The regular military is holding the outer perimeter, the young man with fire hands reported. But they can't get close to the gateway. Every electronic device stops working within 6 blocks of the cathedral. That's actually good for us, the woman said. Shadow creatures are stronger when they can corrupt technology. In the dead zone around the gateway, it's just magic against magic. They moved through the empty streets carefully. Abandoned cars sat with their doors open, where people had fled on foot. Store windows were shattered, and papers blew through the air like snow. But the strangest thing was the silence. In a city of 9 million people, they could barely hear any human voices. "Where's everyone?" the warrior asked. Most evacuated. To the outer districts, the older mountain solid man explained, but some. He pointed to groups of people standing perfectly still on street corners, staring at nothing with empty eyes. The shadow creatures can control humans now, make them into living puppets. The warrior's heart sank. What? In his time, shadow creatures could hurt or destroy people, but they couldn't take away their free will. This was worse than anything he had ever faced. As they got closer to the city center, the air itself began to feel wrong. Colors looked washed out and gray. Sounds seemed muffled and distant. Even breathing became harder, as if the very atmosphere was being slowly drained of life. There, the woman pointed ahead to where a massive cathedral rose above the surrounding buildings. But the ancient stone structure was wrong somehow. Parts of it seemed to exist in 2 places at once, shifting between the solid world and somewhere else entirely. Around the cathedral, reality itself was breaking down. Streets bent upward at impossible angles. Buildings existed as mere outlines, like drawings come to life. And in the air above it all, a tear in the sky showed glimpses of the shadow realm beyond. "The gateway," the silver-haired leader whispered. "It's bigger than we expected." Through the dimensional tier, they could see the shadow creature's homeworld, a place of eternal darkness, where twisted spires reached toward a black sky, and rivers of liquid shadow flowed between mountains made of crystallized despair. "How do we close something that big?" the young man asked. The warrior studied the gateway and felt the magic that had been building inside him for 250 years. It responded to his need, showing him what had to be done. But the price would be higher than anyone expected. "The gateway is anchored to this world by the cathedral," he said slowly. "If we can get inside and reach the altar, I can reverse the spell that opened it." "What's the catch?" the woman asked, knowing him well enough to hear the hesitation in his voice. "To seal a tier this big permanently, someone has to stay on the other side. Someone has to become the lock that keeps it closed." The group fell silent. They all understood what he was saying. This wasn't just a dangerous mission anymore. It was a one-way trip. "No," the woman said firmly. "We didn't wait 250 years just to lose you again." "There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said gently. "I can feel it. The magic knows what needs to be done." Before anyone could argue further, shadow creatures began emerging from the buildings around them. Not the simple ones they had fought in the tunnels, but massive beings that looked like living nightmares. Some had too many arms that ended in claws like broken glass. Others moved like liquid darkness given shape and hunger. "We fight our way to the cathedral," the warrior said, drawing his sword. The blade blazed with light that made the shadow. Creatures hiss and pull back. "Whatever happens, the gateway has to be closed." The battle that followed was unlike anything from the old stories. The magical fighters from New Haven fought with courage and skill, their enchanted weapons cutting through shadow flesh, while their protective spells deflected attacks that would have destroyed normal humans. The tree shepherd that had joined them called forth vines that grew from cracks in the concrete, entangling shadow creatures and holding them still for the warriors to finish. The fire-handed young man sent streams of cleansing flame that made the creatures scream and dissolve, But for every shadow creature they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. They were fighting an endless tide of darkness that poured through the gateway faster than they could stop it. It's the altar. The woman shouted over the sounds of battle. We have to reach the altar. They fought their way up the cathedral steps, through doors that flickered between solid wood and empty space. Inside, the building was even more wrong than outside. The ceiling showed stars that didn't belong to Earth's sky, and the floor seemed to stretch away into infinite distance. At the center of it all stood an altar that had once been carved from simple stone. Now it pulsed with dark energy and hovering. Above it was the heart of the gateway itself, a sphere of absolute darkness that hurt to look at directly. The warrior approached the altar, while his companions held off the shadow creatures that followed them inside. He could feel the magic in his sword responding to the gateway's power, learning how to unravel the spell that held it open. "Wait," the woman called out. She ran to his side, ignoring the battle raging around them. "If you're really going to do this, then I'm going with you." "You can't," he said. "Ow. Someone needs to lead the survivors. Someone needs to rebuild when this is over." "I've spent 250 years keeping you safe," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not about to stop now." Before he could stop her, she placed her hands on the altar beside his. Immediately, the magic connected them both to the gateway's power. Now they were both part of the spell, both necessary to complete it. "Together then," he said, finally understanding that this had always been their destiny. They spoke the words of unbinding in unison, their voices joining in harmony that resonated through both dimensions. The gateway began to shrink, its edges pulling inward like a wound trying to heal. The shadow creatures inside the cathedral screamed as they were pulled back toward their home dimension. The ones still pouring through the tier found themselves being dragged backward, unable to resist the closing portal, as the gateway collapsed to the size of a doorway, then a window, and barely large enough for a person to pass through. The warrior and the woman felt themselves being pulled toward. The magic demanded its price. Guardians, too, stand watch on the other side, and make sure the seal held forever. They stepped through together just as the gateway snapped shut behind them. On the other side, in the realm of eternal shadow, they found something unexpected. The closing of the gateway had changed this place too. Light was beginning to appear in the darkness. Not the harsh light that destroyed shadow creatures, but a gentle glow that transformed them into something new. "Look," the woman said, pointing to where former shadow creatures were becoming beings of twilight instead of pure darkness. Still strange and otherworldly, but no longer filled with hunger for destruction. "We didn't just close the gateway," the warrior realized. "We healed the wound between worlds." They stood together on a hill overlooking the transformed shadow realm, watching as stars began to appear in what had once been an empty black sky. In the distance, they could see the lights of New Haven shining through the dimensional barrier, proof that Earth was safe. "No more invasions," the woman said with satisfaction. "No more war between the realms. And no more loneliness," he added, taking her hand. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Behind them, the former shadow creatures were building something new. Not the twisted spires of their old civilization, but structures that seemed to grow from the ground like living things. World. Where light and shadow could exist in harmony, they had saved both worlds by sacrificing everything they had known. But in return, they had gained something precious, the chance to build something better from the ashes of an ancient war. As the first sunrise in millennia began to paint the Shadow Realm's sky with colors that had never existed before, hand in hand toward whatever new adventure awaited them in this reborn world.